What if the deepest peace you've ever searched for has been quietly waiting inside you all along? Today, through 7 timeless Buddhist stories, passed down from ancient masters to devoted students across thousands of years, we will uncover sacred secrets that can transform how you experience every remaining day of your life. These aren't complicated philosophies or difficult practices. They are gentle whispers of wisdom, about stillness, about letting go, about coming home to yourself. So settle in, dear friend. Take a slow breath, and let these ancient stories guide you back to the peace that has always been yours. Part 1: The Still Pond, Discovering the Quiet Mind Within. Buddhist meditation wisdom for seniors seeking calm. Deep in the forests of ancient India, there lived a young monk who was perpetually anxious. His mind raced constantly, worrying about the future, replaying the past, jumping from thought to thought like a monkey swinging through trees. Exhausted, he approached his teacher, an elderly master known for his profound stillness. "Master," the young monk pleaded, "my mind will not stop. I have tried everything. How do I find peace?" The old teacher said nothing. Instead, he led the young monk to a nearby pond. The surface was turbulent, ripples crossing in every direction, stirred by wind and falling leaves. The reflection of the sky was broken, scattered, and impossible to see clearly. "What do you see?" the master asked. "Chaos," the monk replied. "Movement. Confusion." The master nodded. "Now, we wait." They sat in silence as the sun moved across the sky. Gradually, the wind died down. The leaves stopped falling. And the pond grew still. Perfectly, mirror-like still. Now, when the monk looked, he saw the sky reflected with perfect clarity, clouds drifting, birds flying, the blue depth of heaven itself. "What do you see now?" the master asked. "Everything," the monk whispered. "I see everything clearly." The master smiled gently. "Your mind is this pond. You cannot force stillness by fighting the ripples. You can only stop adding to the disturbance. Sit quietly. Stop throwing stones. And clarity will come, all by itself." Dear friend, how many stones do we throw into our own pond each day? Worries about health, family concerns, fears about the future, regrets about the past. Each thought creates another ripple, and we wonder why we cannot see clearly, why peace feels so far away. But the Buddha taught a profound truth. Peace comes not from the absence of disturbance, but from the stillness that remains untouched beneath all disturbance. Let me share a modern story. There was a retired teacher named Eleanor, 74 years old, who came to meditation with great skepticism. Her life had been filled with noise, raising 4 children, managing classrooms of energetic students, caring for aging parents. Even in retirement, her mind had never learned to rest. "I've tried meditation," she told her instructor. "But I can't stop my thoughts. I must be doing it wrong." The instructor, a gentle woman with kind eyes, asked Eleanor to close her eyes and listen. "What do you hear?" Eleanor listened. "I hear cars outside. A clock ticking. Someone is coughing in the next room." "Good," the instructor said. "Now, where is the silence between these sounds?" Eleanor paused. And then, she noticed something she had never paid attention to before. Between the car sounds, between the ticking, between the coughing, there were gaps. Tiny pockets of pure silence. They had always been there. She had simply never looked for them. This is how it is with your mind, the instructor explained. Between your thoughts, there are gaps of stillness. You don't need to stop your thoughts. Just begin to notice the spaces between them. Rest there, even for a moment. Eleanor practiced this simple technique daily. She didn't become a perfect meditator. Her thoughts still came and went. But slowly, she began to sense something beneath the mental noise, a quiet presence, a watching awareness, a stillness that had nothing to do with what was happening on the surface. I feel like I've found a room in my house I never knew existed, she told her daughter. It's been there all along. I just didn't have the key. The Buddha taught, within this very body, 6 feet in length, along with its perceptions and thoughts, I declare is the world, the origin of the world, the end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering. Everything you seek is already within you. The peace you long for is not hiding in better circumstances, in solved problems, in answered prayers. It is here, now, waiting in the stillness beneath your thoughts. Will you look for it today? Part 2, The Second Arrow, Freedom from Self-Created Suffering. Buddhist Psychology for Emotional Healing in Later Life. There is a famous teaching from the Buddha about 2 arrows. When life strikes us with difficulty, illness, loss, disappointment, pain, this is the first arrow. We cannot always avoid it. It is simply part of being human. But then, the Buddha observed, we often shoot ourselves with a second arrow. We add suffering to our suffering. We resist. We rage. We ask, why me? We replay the painful moment endlessly. We imagine worst-case futures. We blame ourselves or others. The first arrow causes pain. The second arrow, the one we shoot ourselves, causes suffering. And this second arrow is optional. Consider how often we create our own storms. Something disappointing happens. A medical test comes back with concerning results. A child doesn't call when expected. A friend says something thoughtless. The first arrow lands. But then, how quickly do we reach for the second arrow? This always happens to me. I can't handle this. Everything is falling apart. It's going to get worse. We shoot. And shoot again. And again. Until we're lying wounded not from what happened, but from our response to what happened. Let me share a story of transformation. There was a man named George, 78 years old, who received a diagnosis that changed his life. Early-stage Parkinson's disease. The first arrow had landed. At first, George shot himself with many arrows. He raged against the unfairness. He withdrew from friends. He spent hours researching worst-case scenarios online, terrifying himself with images of what might come. His wife watched him disappear into bitterness and fear. One day, an old friend, a Vietnam veteran who had lost both legs in the war, came to visit. "I heard about your diagnosis," the friend said simply. "I'm sorry. That's hard." "Hard?" George scoffed. "It's a death sentence. My life is over." His friend was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something George never forgot. "George, I lost my legs when I was 23 years old. I spent 5 years in a dark place, angry, bitter, sure that life had cheated me. But one day, I realized something. I couldn't get my legs back. That was done. But I was choosing, every single day, to lose my mind too. And that was optional. George stared at his friend, sitting peacefully in his wheelchair, radiating a calm that George desperately envied. How? George whispered. How do you accept something so unfair? I don't accept that it's fair, his friend replied. I accept that it is. There's a difference. Fighting reality is exhausting. Accepting it sets you free to work with what you've got. That conversation planted a seed in George's heart. He began practicing what Buddhists call equanimity, meeting life as it is, not as he wished it would be. His Parkinson's didn't disappear. The first arrow remained. But slowly, George stopped reaching for second arrows. He joined a support group. He focused on what he could still do, rather than what he couldn't. He told his wife, I may have this disease, but I won't let it have me. His final years were not easy, but they were peaceful. And that peace came not from his circumstances, but from his relationship to his circumstances. The Buddha taught, pain is inevitable. Suffering is optional. What second arrows are you shooting at yourself today? What would happen if you simply put down the bow? The first arrow has already landed. That cannot be changed. But the second arrow, that choice is still yours. If these words are resonating with you, take a moment to subscribe to Buddha Coha. Here, we explore the gentle art of peaceful living, one breath, one insight, one moment at a time. You are not walking this path alone. Part 3, The Grateful Heart, Transforming Ordinary Life into Sacred Ground. Buddhist Gratitude Practice for Joyful Aging. There is a Zen story about a monk who owned only 2 possessions, a single robe and a begging bowl. One morning, a wealthy merchant passed by and saw the monk sitting peacefully under a tree, watching the sunrise with a gentle smile. How can you be so content? The merchant asked, astonished. You own nothing. You have no home, no security, no comforts. The monk looked up with eyes full of warmth. You are mistaken, my friend, he said. I own this sunrise. I own the song of that bird in the branches above. I own the feeling of cool morning air on my skin. I own the breath moving in and out of my body. I own this moment of being alive. He gestured to the merchant's fine clothes, his heavy jewelry, his worried expression. Tell me, which of us is truly wealthy? The one who has many things but cannot enjoy them? Or the one who has few things, but experiences each one as a miracle? Gratitude, dear friend, is not about ignoring problems or pretending everything is fine. It is about seeing clearly. When we practice gratitude, we train our eyes to notice what is here, really here, instead of fixating on what is missing. And when we truly see, we realize we have been surrounded by abundance all along. Consider the story of a woman named Rose, 82 years old. Rose lived in a small apartment. Her husband had passed. Her eyesight was failing. Arthritis made simple tasks painful. By any external measure, she had reasons to complain. But when visitors came to see Rose, they always left feeling lifted. How do you stay so positive? They would ask. Everything is so hard for you. Rose would smile her wrinkled smile and say, every morning, I wake up, and that's the first miracle. My heart is still beating without me asking it to. Isn't that remarkable? Then I feel my sheets, soft, clean, warm. Another gift. I hear birds outside my window. I can still hear. Do you know how many people would love to hear birds again? Someone brings me tea. The warmth spreads through my old hands. What a blessing, hands that still work, that still feel. By the time I've finished counting my morning miracles, I have no room left for complaints. Rose had discovered something profound. Happiness is not about having more. It is about noticing more. The miracle isn't somewhere else. It's here. In this breath. In this heartbeat. In this perfectly ordinary, utterly extraordinary moment. The Buddha taught, let us rise up and be thankful, for if we didn't learn a lot today, at least we learned a little. And if we didn't learn a little, at least we didn't get sick. And if we got sick, at least we didn't die. So let us all be thankful. What gifts surround you right now that you have stopped noticing? The roof over your head. The food in your kitchen. The people who care about you, even imperfectly. The miracle of consciousness itself, the ability to hear these words, to feel your heart respond, to reflect on your own existence. Gratitude doesn't change circumstances. It changes you. And when you change, everything looks different. Part 4, The Gentle Witness, Compassion for Your Own Journey. Buddhist Self-Compassion Teachings for Healing Past Wounds. There is a beautiful teaching from the Buddhist tradition about how we should treat ourselves. Imagine you are walking through a village and you see a young child who has fallen and scraped their knee. They are crying, frightened, in pain. What would you do? Would you walk up to that child and say, "You fool. How could you be so clumsy? This is your own fault. You deserve to hurt"? Of course not. You would kneel. Speak gently. Clean the wound. Offer comfort. It's okay. I'm here. Let me help you. You're going to be all right. And yet, how often do we treat ourselves with far less kindness than we would offer a stranger's child? When we make mistakes, we criticize ourselves mercilessly. When we struggle, we tell ourselves we should be stronger. When old wounds resurface, we wonder why we aren't over it by now. We forget that inside each of us is a child who was sometimes frightened, sometimes hurt, sometimes alone. That child didn't disappear when we grew up. They became part of us. And they still need our kindness. There was an elderly man named Samuel, 76 years old, who carried shame from his youth. As a young man, Samuel had made choices that hurt his family. He had been selfish, reckless, and unkind. Though he had long since changed, becoming a devoted husband, a loving father, a generous friend, something deep inside him still believed he was unforgivable. "I know I'm different now," he told his counselor. "But I still feel like that terrible person underneath." The counselor invited Samuel to try something difficult. "Close your eyes," she said. "Picture yourself at the age when you made those choices." "How old were you?" 23, Samuel whispered. "What was happening in your life then? Were you happy? Were you hurting?" Slowly, memories surfaced. Samuel remembered his father's cruelty, his mother's silence, the desperation he felt to escape, to numb himself, to prove he was worth something. That young man, the counselor said gently, was doing his best with what he had. He didn't have the tools you have now. He hadn't learned what you've learned. He was wounded and scared. Tears streamed down Samuel's weathered face. Can you find any compassion for him? For the first time in 50 years, Samuel allowed himself to see his younger self not as a monster, but as a wounded human being who was struggling. "I'm sorry," he whispered, not to anyone outside, but to the young man he had been. "I'm sorry I've been so hard on you. You were doing your best." Something softened in Samuel that day. The shame didn't vanish instantly. But a door opened, a door to healing he had believed was locked forever. The Buddha taught, "You, yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Whatever you have done, whatever you have failed to do, whatever wounds you carry from decades past, you are worthy of your own compassion. Speak to yourself as you would speak to someone you love. Because underneath all the years, all the mistakes, all the armor, there is someone precious. There is someone who has always deserved kindness. There is you." Part 5. The Open Hand, Releasing Control and Embracing Uncertainty. Buddhist Wisdom for Letting Go of Worry and Control. There is a parable about a farmer who loved his horse. One day, the horse ran away. "What terrible luck," his neighbors said. The farmer replied simply, "Perhaps." The next week, the horse returned, bringing 3 wild horses with it. "What wonderful luck," the neighbors exclaimed. "Perhaps," said the farmer. The following day, the farmer's son tried to ride one of the wild horses, fell, and broke his leg. "How awful," the neighbors cried. "Perhaps," the farmer repeated. A week later, military officials came through the village, conscripting young men for war. The farmer's son, with his broken leg, was passed over. "How fortunate," the neighbors declared. And the farmer, once again, simply said, "Perhaps." How desperately we try to control life. We grip tightly to our plans. We decide what outcomes are good and which are bad. We exhaust ourselves trying to arrange circumstances that will make us feel safe. And yet, life continuously surprises us. What seemed like a disaster becomes a doorway. What seemed like a blessing becomes a burden. We simply cannot know, in any given moment, how the story will unfold. There was a woman named Patricia, 69 years old, who spent her life trying to control everything. Her children's choices, her husband's health, her home, her finances, her image. She made endless lists. She worried constantly. She lay awake at night running through scenarios, trying to prepare for every possible problem. "If I just stay vigilant," she believed, "I can keep everyone safe." Then her husband had a sudden heart attack. Despite all her planning, all her vigilance, she couldn't prevent it. He survived, but something in Patricia broke. All her control had been an illusion. She had spent years gripping life tightly, and life had slipped through her fingers anyway. In the hospital waiting room, exhausted and terrified, Patricia encountered a hospital chaplain. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. "I've always been the one in control. And now I realize I never really was." The chaplain sat beside her and said something that changed Patricia's life. "Control is like trying to hold water in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the more slips away. But if you open your hand, the water rests there peacefully." Patricia looked at her clenched fists, literally clenched, white-knuckled, exhausted. Slowly, she opened them. And in that simple physical gesture, something shifted inside her. She began practicing what Buddhists call surrender, not giving up, but giving over. Trusting that she could meet whatever arose, moment by moment, without needing to know everything in advance. Her husband recovered. And Patricia discovered something remarkable. Life didn't fall apart when she loosened her grip. In fact, it began to flow more freely than ever before. The Buddha taught, the root of suffering is attachment. What are you gripping tightly today? What outcomes are you certain must happen for you to be okay? What would it feel like to open your hand? Not to stop caring. Not to be passive. But to care with open hands instead of clenched fists. To participate in life fully, while releasing the illusion that you can control its unfolding. This is freedom. This is peace. Part 6, The Eternal Present, Coming Home to Now. Buddhist mindfulness practices for living fully in each moment. A student once asked a Zen master, "What is the essence of enlightenment?" The master replied, "When I eat, I eat. When I walk, I walk. When I sleep, I sleep." The student was confused. "But everyone does that. What is special about your practice?" The master smiled. "Ah, but when most people eat, they are thinking about work. When they walk, they are planning tomorrow. When they sleep, they are reviewing yesterday. They are rarely here. I am always here. That is the difference." How much of your life have you missed, while being somewhere else? Bodies at dinner tables, minds at the office. Eyes watching grandchildren play, hearts worrying about the future. Hands holding loved ones, thoughts drifting to old resentments. We are time travelers, constantly escaping the present moment for memories of the past or fantasies of the future. And the present, this breath, this heartbeat, this miracle of being alive right now, passes by unnoticed. There was a man named Arthur, 80 years old, who received news that shook him awake. A friend his age had died suddenly. One day healthy, the next day gone. At the funeral, Arthur sat in stunned silence. He realized that he had been sleepwalking through his life. Always planning for someday. Always postponing happiness. Always waiting for circumstances to be right. And now, looking at his friend's casket, he understood, there is no someday. There is only today. There is only now. Arthur went home that evening and sat on his back porch, something he rarely did because he was always too busy. He watched the sunset. Really watched it. The way the colors shifted. The way the light faded. The way the first stars appeared. Tears streamed down his face, not from sadness, but from something like grief for all the sunsets he had ignored. From that day forward, Arthur practiced what he called deliberate presence. When he ate breakfast, he tasted his breakfast. When he talked with his wife, he looked into her eyes. When he played with his grandchildren, he left his phone in another room. "I'm not doing anything different," he told his daughter. "I'm just finally doing what I'm doing." The Buddha taught, the past is already gone. The future is not yet here. There is only one moment for you to live, and that is the present moment. Where are you right now? Not your body, your attention. Are you here, receiving these words? Or are you already somewhere else, planning what comes next, worrying about something unresolved? Come back. Come home. This moment is the only one you will ever have. Don't miss it. If you feel called to explore this path more deeply, I warmly invite you to subscribe to Buddha Coha and become part of our gentle community. Together, we practice waking up, one breath, one moment, one realization at a time. Part 7, The Quiet Harvest, Embracing Life's Final Chapters with Grace. Buddhist teachings on aging, legacy, and spiritual awakening. As our journey together draws toward its close, let us sit with a final teaching. The Buddha, near the end of his own life, gathered his closest disciples and spoke these words: "All things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence. Be a lamp unto yourself." He did not speak of his accomplishments. He did not list his teachings. He simply reminded them, everything changes, and your peace is your own responsibility. What does it mean to embrace life's final chapters with grace? It means recognizing that this season, this time of silver hair and seasoned wisdom, of slower steps and longer memories, is not a waiting room for death. It is blossoming. A time when the ego's endless striving can finally soften. When the desperate need to prove ourselves can rest. When we can turn our attention from achieving to being. From accumulating to appreciating. From becoming to simply existing. There was a woman named Margaret, 91 years old, who was asked the secret to her contentment. She sat in her small room at the care facility, surrounded by a few photographs, a well-worn book of poetry, and a single flowering plant. "I have learned," she said slowly, "that life is not about the things we gather. It is about the love we give and receive. Everything else fades." She pointed to a photograph of herself as a young woman, beautiful, full of ambition, full of plans. "I don't miss that body," she said. "I don't miss that busyness. What I miss is the people I loved who have gone ahead. And what I have discovered is that love doesn't end. It transforms. It expands." She smiled, her eyes bright. "I am more peaceful now than I have ever been. Because I have finally stopped fighting what is. I have stopped demanding that life be different. I have learned to say, thank you, for each breath, each morning, each kindness." She took the visitor's hand. "Don't wait until you are 91 to learn this. Start now. Be grateful now. Be gentle now. Be here now." The Buddha taught, thousands of candles can be lit from a single candle, and the life of that candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared. Your life has been a candle. How many lives have you touched? How many small kindnesses have you offered? How many moments of love have you shared? These are your legacy. Not your accomplishments. Not your possessions. The love you have given. The peace you have cultivated. The light you have shared. This is what remains. This is what matters. Dear friend, we have traveled far together today. We have sat beside still ponds and learned to stop stirring our own waters. We have put down second arrows and freed ourselves from self-created suffering. We have opened our eyes to miracles hiding in plain sight. We have offered compassion to the wounded ones within us. We have opened our hands and released the exhausting illusion of control. We have come home to the present moment, the only moment we truly have. And we have glimpsed the quiet harvest that awaits us in life's final, most precious chapters. So here is my gentle invitation. Today, choose one teaching to carry with you. Just one. Perhaps it's noticing the stillness between your thoughts. Perhaps it's putting down a second arrow you've been shooting at yourself. Perhaps it's finding 3 things to be grateful for before you sleep tonight. Perhaps it's speaking kindly to a part of yourself that has waited too long for compassion. Whatever you choose, let it be your doorway. Because peace is not a distant destination. It is the path itself. And you are already walking it. Before you go, I have a gentle request. If this message has touched your heart, please subscribe to Buddha Coha. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a new teaching. And share this video with someone you love, a parent, a friend, a fellow traveler on this precious human journey. Leave a comment below. What teaching resonated most deeply with you today? What practice will you carry forward? I read every comment, and your words may be exactly what another soul needs to hear. As you go from here, receive this blessing. May you find the stillness that lives beneath all noise. May you put down the arrows you aim at yourself. May you see the miracles that surround you. May you offer yourself the compassion you freely give others. May you open your hands and trust the flow of life. May you come home to this moment, the only one that is ever truly yours. May you embrace your days with grace, with gratitude, with peace. Until we meet again, dear friend, breathe gently, walk slowly, and remember, the most peaceful chapter of your life is already unfolding. Right here, right now.